Welfare Committee will be called to order. We do have a lot of testimony today, not nearly as much as our Utilities Chair has later on in the day, but we still have 16. So just to give everybody a little bit of understanding of how we're going to proceed with the hearing, proponents are going to be broken down into 3-minute testimony limited. We're trying to keep everybody under 20 minutes in proponents, and opponents will have 2 minutes just because you guys have twice as many, and then the neutral will have 2 minutes as well. So with that, we will open up our hearing on Senate Bill 212. And first up, we're going to have a bill explanation from our revisor's office with Jenna Moyer. Jenna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee. Senate Bill 212 is a bill that would prohibit the Secretary of Environment from requiring additional immunizations to attend a child care facility or school. This bill would amend KSA 65508 and KSA 726262. And under the current law, children who attend either a state licensed daycare or a grade school, middle school, or high school, including private schools, are required to receive certain vaccinations or immunizations before they're allowed to attend those schools, unless there is a religious or a medical exemption. And those are listed in the Kansas administrative regulations right now. So the Secretary of Kdhs has the authority to amend that list, to add to it, either to take from it under the current law. And under this bill, that authority would instead be given to the legislature, and all of those, that list of required vaccinations that are currently in KAR 28120 would now be put into these two statutes. And so if an immunization wanted to be added to the list, that process would have to go through the legislature now, instead of going through the administrative regulations process. And I will note that in 2020, a similar bill, which was House Bill 2601, was introduced, and it did have a hearing in House Education Committee. There's very few differences between those two bills, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Jenna, thank you for the explanation. Committee, do we have any questions for Jenna on the bill? Okay, not seeing any. We will now open up for proponents. First proponent is Senator Mark Steffen. Senator? 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. Yes, Mark Steffen, Senator District 34. I'll move quick. I want to get out of the way for the important people to come behind me. This is a very simple bill of critical importance. It puts the decision-making back in the hands of parents in this legislature. From a policy standpoint, it reaffirms our constitutional inalienable rights. The best policies to keep kids healthy in daycares and schools is keeping acutely ill people out. It's very simple. This bill protects our children from a vaccine, and make no mistake, the vast majority of the interest in this bill is in regards to the COVID vaccine. It protects our children from a vaccine that has a morbidity and mortality profile equal to or higher than the COVID-19 virus itself, for sure in this age group of people. It's a vaccine that is experimental, a vaccine that is gene manipulative, a technique never used before, and its long-term dangers won't be fully known for decades. You're going to hear about the Nuremberg Code, a post-World War II international document approved by President Truman to right the wrongs of the Nazi regime in experimenting on humans. The Nuremberg Code states explicitly that voluntary consent from patients is required for human experimentation. The COVID vaccine is an experimental vaccine. In 1986, the U.S. legislature passed and President Reagan signed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. It gave vaccine manufacturers immunity from lawsuits. Now, don't get me wrong, used appropriately, vaccines are a great, great thing. As a physician, I've recommended them to many individuals. Recommend is the key. As a physician myself, I've never once mandated a treatment, nor is any of the other doctors who will show up later, like Dr. Epley. He's never mandated a treatment plan. The CDC, FDA, NIH, and the World Health Organization recommend vaccinations for society. Why in the world would we allow Lee Norman to mandate anything? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stephan. In committee, we will hold until all proponents have had an opportunity to speak before we get to questions. Next up is William Mice. He's an attorney at law. And if you would just keep your under 3 minutes, exactly. Thank you.
Oh, adding meningitis to the list. He also added hepatitis A to that list. And so the question is, what was the change between that time? Well, there's no great breakthrough. There was no new scientific information. The only breakthrough was we had a new Secretary of Health. We had Dr. Norman. That's the only difference. We think the vaccine issue has become too politicized, and that we need the discussion of political situations to be before this body, before the legislature. The secretary, he can offer all the evidence he wants to at these kind of hearings. He can bring in testimony, but in the end, it should be up to the legislature. That would be you folks. That we believe that new vaccines are in the children's future, especially for COVID. There's already emergency authorization for children as young as 16. And there are testing going on for children as young as 6 months. We have no doubt that COVID vaccines will be approved for school children in the near future. Am I up? Oh, near future. And we think it'll be just in time for the 21 to 22 school year, and we don't want that to happen. So we urge you to make this decision here. Kansas parents deserve their elected reps to be the ones to decide whether we have COVID, whether the children are shown to have, and this is when they're shown to have a little likelihood of suffering from this virus, for a vaccine that's rushed through the development and approval process and by an industry that's exempted from all liability for any harm caused to their children, either now or in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Coney Newcomb, President for the Kansans for Health Freedom. Welcome to the committee, Coney.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I'm also the grandmother to 19 grandchildren, one of who was injured and in a 3-day coma from vaccine injury. 1 out of 19. Is that an acceptable amount to have dead or injured? We have a problem. Vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. They're ruled as such by the United States Congress and the United States Supreme Court. How can unavoidably unsafe be safe for babies and children? Every year, thousands of children get unavoidably unsafe vaccines jabbed into them because they are mandated by the Kdhs. The supporting county agencies and schools do not make it distinctly clear that exemptions are available or that vaccines do and cause lifelong health issues and even death. The Kdhs and its subsidiary offices are nothing less than puppets of the CDC and the ACIP. They regurgitate what they are told to do by agencies who receive funding and influence from pharma. The egregious policy of forcing vaccines intramuscularly into healthy children for illnesses they would almost never have needs a thorough rethink. Our opponents on this bill earnestly believe that government and pharma-funded agencies know best when it comes to our children's health. Unavoidably Unsafe demonstrates itself boldly through the COVID experience. If you had a car that had some kind of operative malfunction, and it had had been known to cause maybe 100 deaths and several hundred injuries, what would happen? The regulatory agencies would jump on the situation and everyone would know about it. This does not happen with vaccines. We have babies in trials, 6-month-old babies in trials right now, and no one is paying attention. They're still calling it safe. The Kdhs, the parents actually know their children. The Kdhs does not, neither do the legislators, but we elect legislators to represent us. The Kdhs does not believe in vaccine injury or choice. Their goal is to vaccinate all with as many vaccines as possible from the womb to the tomb. If necessary, use coercion, discrimination, and even bribery. They have totally bought into the belief that vaccines are safe and effective, even though the requirement for accountability and safety was not done by the vaccine regulators since 1986. Parents right now in our community are afraid to take their children to pediatricians because they are being forced to follow the schedule. This is a scary world for young parents. Kansas for Health Freedom listens to the parents. We have heard their stories. We will fight for them. We will always hear them. They are the ones who are heard by the Kdhs. We will not give up trying to secure the freedom they need to follow their heartfelt convictions. You were elected by the people of your district, not to stand with big industry, not to stand with the commoditization of children, but to represent the people. Please do so and vote for SB 212. Let's get this bill out of committee and onto the Senate floor. God bless you as you consider these comments, and thank you for listening this morning. Thank you.
Connie, thank you for your testimony. Committee, next we have Rachel Price. She's a private citizen. Rachel, welcome to the committee.
Let me get my visuals ready here before you start timing, please. I'm going to try to go fast, but I timed myself 4 minutes, so I'm going to have to talk fast. Okay. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I am an ex-vaxxer. All of my children received all of their school vaccines and all have the typical vaccine-related health issues: asthma, eczema, allergies, and autoimmune disorders. The HPV vaccine was my epiphany. I began reading countless books. I began reading scientific literature, something people can't do today because the internet is being scrubbed and books are being banned. What I found is that vaccines contain highly toxic ingredients, they are totally inadequately tested, and that the pharmaceutical industry has a heavy influence on science, on medical doctors, on medical schools, on government policy, and probably worst of all, on the media. I was born in the 60s when only 5 doses were recommended for children. When my daughter was born in 1985, that number had jumped to 24 doses. Today's Kansas kids receive 49 doses, and if IKC has their way with the HPV and the annual flu vaccines, that number is going to be 70 doses of vaccines. When is enough enough? And when does it become too much? Next, of course, is going to be the warp speed COVID vaccine, the controversial vaccine that's already caused over 2,000 deaths. In 1986, when pharma received their free pass from being sued for damages, this child vaccine schedule skyrocketed. Thereafter, our children's health plummeted. Never before have our kids had so many vaccines. Never before have they been so sick. Today, 1 child in 6 has a developmental disability. 54% suffer from chronic illness. The U.S. has the highest infant mortality rate in all developed countries, while we administer the highest number of vaccines to our infants. Is it possible that we are trading acute childhood or illnesses, which often resolve themselves, for chronic disease, which don't. For every paid professional who testifies safe and effective, there are hundreds of thousands of parents and children who can refute this, children with vaccine injuries. Many doctors know the truth, but those doctors will not speak because they are either paid or they are afraid. Those brave doctors who do speak out are threatened with loss of their license, or they are slurred with the term of quack. The health secretary is vulnerable to partisan and corrupt pharmaceutical influence. Dr. Norman is a perfect example with his infamous, purposely deceitful mask graph in 2020 and his ties to pharma-funded IKC. He hasn't taken an oath to uphold our Constitution, but you senators have. You've been tasked to protect our liberties, not just our health. We are capable of making our own health decisions. We should have the liberty to do so. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, next we have Sherry Graham, a private citizen. Sherry, welcome to the committee.
Thank you for letting me speak today. I want to talk about simply sharing some information with you about finances, about connections between the Kdhs and Immunized Kansas Coalition, as well as the influence that pharmaceutical companies have on these organizations and on our legislators. First of all, with Kdhs and Immunized Kansas Coalition, according to the IKC bylaws, a Kdhs institutional representative serves on the board of IKC. Also, Kdhs appears to have a yearly contract with Immunized Kansas Coalition and gives a lot of money to that organization. In August of 2017, in their meeting, in the IKC's meeting minutes, they stated they gave $75,000, they received $75,000 from the Kdhs in the 18 months starting January 16. October 2017, the minutes state they received $100,000 from the Kdhs for the 2017-2018 year. And then in February of 2019, it states they received $100,000 again from the Kdhs for fiscal year 2019. On a side note, it also notes in the minutes that IKC was awarded a grant from the CDC Foundation to work on projects to increase vaccine confidence. The Cdc Foundation, if you're not familiar, is a nonprofit arm of the CDC and gets a lot of money from pharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturers. For an example, from the fiscal year 2020, Johnson & Johnson gave the CDC Foundation well over $1 million. Pfizer gave CDC Foundation over $4.8 million. Merck gave CDC Foundation over $2 million. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave CDC Foundation over $11.5 million. The CDC itself gave the CDC Foundation over $54.5 million. There's more, but that just gives you an idea of the kind of money that is moving around through these different organizations, through the CDC Foundation. Another note, the following pharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturers are liaison members of IKC and also are CDC Foundation partners. Companies like GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, Sanofi Pasteur. So pharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturers, they give a lot of money to the CDC Foundation, which then turns around and offers grants to organizations like IKC. We also know that pharma does a lot of lobbying here at the Capitol, giving money to legislators' campaigns. Then some also pharmaceutical companies they're also liaison members of Immunized Kansas Coalition and the CDC Foundation. One thing I want to note, that Kdhs has a pretty big budget. I did not realize this. 2017, they have $2.5 billion as their yearly budget, with $2.3 billion of that allotted to healthcare finance. So taking all this money that's involved, please support 212. We need to let Kansans' voices be heard and not be influenced by the pharma companies. Thank you.
Sherry, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, that does conclude our oral proponent testimony. I would draw your attention to the plethora of written-only testimony for proponents. I believe there's 87 if my math is accurate. Instead of opening up for questions right now, I know Representative Epley has a 9 o'clock meeting, so we're going to jump to his opponent testimony, open up for questions for him so he can get to his meeting, and then we'll open up for proponent testimony. Representative Epley, if you can keep it to under 2 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Chair Hildebrand, and members of the committee. You have my testimony. It kind of speaks for itself. Gosh, heard a lot of information here today that I don't agree with, but we'll try to get to a very little bit of it. And I want to tell you, this really is, as I said at the top of my testimony, solution looking for a problem. It makes me sad that we hear the issues that we hear because really we're victims of our own success. Vaccinations are abundantly successful, and because of that, we don't see the diseases we used to see at one time. And that's really, I think, a big part of the optics in the problem. As far as the IKC connection, I'm a past president of IKC. I've never received a dollar from that. I'm speaking to you here today as a practicing physician of 40 years. Unfortunately, I have to tell you it is 40 years. I've probably given more vaccinations than anyone under the dome and ordered them. And by default, we are actually required to give these vaccines to school children. We don't just do that involuntarily. It's a schedule. This is true in every state of the union, and that's what I want to go to. In all 50 states, either the Department of Health or the Secretary is the individual that makes this decision. Kansas would be the first, and I want to emphasize this, the first state to go against the grain on that. In 13 states, the Secretary or the Director of Health makes those requirements. In 33 states, it's either a board or commission. In another 3, they fall to the federal government or the ACIP. So these are firm recommendations. These are not something done willy-nilly. They're done by scientists and by experts. I would ask you to read my testimony. We talk about the myths, as I call them, of vaccinations. I think it's important you look at them. And I'll simply state that vaccines are actually the second largest breakthrough for saving lives and public health in our nation, and next to drinking water. And the last thing I'll conclude is vaccine science is far better left in the capable hands of scientists and experts rather than legislators. The Secretary of Kdhs is fully capable of making the right timely decisions about which immunizations should be on the required list for infants and teenagers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee.
Representative, you might want to stay there. I don't know if we have any questions for you, if you don't mind, but we'll go ahead and get
Happy,
your questions.
yeah.
So you go to your 9 o'clock committee. Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Epley, is the COVID vaccine without risk?
Every vaccine, Senator, has some relative risks. Someone opined that there were 200 deaths from COVID-19. I've looked at the CDC website. I've never seen any deaths, and I think there have been about, now I think there's over 60, 70 million given, so. I'm sorry, 2,000 deaths for the record. I didn't mean to mischaracterize the deaths.
Are you familiar with the vaccine adverse event reporting system?
I am familiar with VAERS, V-A-E-R-S, yes.
Right. And it shows over 1,000 deaths linked to the COVID vaccine.
Those are allegations, but they've not been proven yet,
line,
Senator Stephan.
The bottom line is that
Senator and Representative, we will keep this meeting cordial. We're going to ask questions and answer questions appropriately. We are not going to debate the issue. So if we could, please refrain from a debate and get back to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. The bottom line being is this COVID vaccine does have morbidity and mortality, and I am not willing to take the decision-making out of the hands of the parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Epley, for being here, and I very much support your position about vaccines, having taught for 36 years, so I also see them in the classroom. But there was a comment made about the high infant mortality in the United States and linking that to vaccines. Would you want to comment on that?
I'm not sure specifically which vaccine. I know there's been over 500 and now 45,000 deaths due to COVID-19. As far as deaths from vaccinations, I personally have given tens of thousands of vaccines, and I've never seen a death, but I've seen a lot of death and mortality and morbidity due to people not receiving vaccines on a timely basis.
But have you read or seen anything about high infant mortality in the United States due to vaccines?
No, ma'am, I'm not aware of any data that supports that. We have, certainly of developed countries, we still have a concerning infant mortality rate, but to see that, connect those dots to vaccinations, I've never seen that done, no. No, Senator Petty.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Representative. One quick question for you, and that is, I heard you say recommendations, I heard you say guidelines. The problem is, it seems that those recommendations and guidelines turned into mandates. Have you seen that happen? Is it still considered recommendations and guidelines?
Well, by the ACIP, recommendations become requirements in all 50 states for the infant and childhood vaccination schedule, and we have a schedule that's basically the same as other 50 states. Now, we do have the meningitis vaccine, and there are about 33 states that now recommend that or require that, and we're one of those 33 states, so we're in the majority on that. So we follow CDC and what's called the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. We follow that schedule.
Thank you.
Hope that was helpful.
Committee, do we have any further questions for Representative Epley? Or Senator Holscher is online, has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Representative Epley, my question is this. We have heard from the supporters of this bill that the COVID-19 vaccine was rushed, that it hasn't been researched enough. But my understanding is that different variations of the SARS vaccine have been researched for probably 2 decades, and that essentially we're talking about some changes made for this particular variant. Can you expound upon that a little bit? And maybe also, I mean, my understanding too is that the U.S. was not the only country focused on trying to find a vaccine for COVID-19. Can you provide any more information on that?
Yes, ma'am. I'm happy to respond to that. So this is you can't win situation. People want a vaccine as soon as possible, and then there are those that question the vaccine because it's developed so quickly with new methodology and new science. You know, they raise questions. So you can't win. We have this vaccine that's been deployed to well over 70 million people already, I think approaching 100 million. And, you know, it's too soon. But it's followed the standard phase 3 trials that exist in the pharmacology industry. Those phases were done concurrently rather than consecutively, which means it's sped up. And that was ordered by a Republican administration, and it delivered within a year. It was 256 days. It was a record. And we've had millions of people receive the vaccine. Now, as far as the variants, we are studying the variants, and we see genomic drift right now. And I'm certain, because Moderna is already developing a booster, that we're all going to be offered a booster at some point in time, probably within the year as it relates to COVID-19. It will be voluntary. It will not be required by anyone, but it will be available for those people that feel that they're at risk for COVID-19. Did that answer your question, Senator Holscher?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. And I have a general question, and this will probably be for any of the opponents that come up following, but I just want to put this out there so they can put some thought into it. With the recent Supreme Court Hodis decision that guarantees constitutional right to personal autonomy, how does that fit in with mandated vaccinations? So if you can answer it, that's fine. If not, we'll wait for a different opponent.
I might be the most experienced with that, Senator. I'll really address it quickly. I'll just say I'm not sure how we connect the dots with a state case as it relates to required vaccinations in the state. I don't think it's going to have any impact directly on a required schedule that Kdhs has in regulation right now, as do all other states in the nation. So I don't see a connection there, but I appreciate that optic.
Thank you. Committee, now we'll open up for, thank you, Representative Epley. I know you have a meeting to get to. So, committee, we will now open up for questions to the proponents, if we have any. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Mr. Meitz. Thanks for being here. You did mention in your testimony about this bill was important to not politicize. However, I'm elected every 4 years, and so is everybody in this room, and the House is elected every 2 years. It seems to me that what we have now is not a politicized system. As we heard from Dr. Epley, every state in the union uses the same process of not having elected officials make these kinds of decisions. And you are a practicing attorney, so can you explain to me how you can say this does not politicize?
Well,
Mr. Mice, if you would just state your name and who you're representing, if you would state your name and who you're representing before you answer that. So
yes,
people
William.
listening online can hear.
William Mize, representing myself, I guess, and the Kansas for Health Freedom. So I guess my idea would be that I think the example I gave you in 2017, I think that is simply a political process that went to. That wasn't a medical situation. We had the 2017 secretary saying that we didn't need that vaccine, but then we changed to a new administration. Nothing else changes. We just have a new secretary. The new secretary is the one that says, now we need that vaccine, and by the way, we need another one. All I'm saying is that I think if you look at what's happened in the last year or so with COVID and all of that, I don't think you can escape the political process that's being put to it. So if we're going to do that, I think the real political process is you folks, and you ought to have some kind of control, so not someone that we just appoint, that the governor appoints this doctor and he decides what mandates we're going to have. We already have 70 vaccines. We're not bothering those 70, but if you want to keep going on and on with COVID and all these, we want you folks to weigh in on it. That's all we're saying.
Just as a follow-up.
Sure.
So the secretaries do make their decisions, as we heard from Dr. Epley, based on the CDC and the ACIP's guidelines to the states. So you're, and also you mentioned about basing it just on COVID, but yet this same bill was introduced prior to COVID. So it's definitely not just tied to COVID.
Well, sure, and we saw Gardasil vaccines coming, and we saw the idea that they would want to mandate vaccines for influenza for children and whatever. So we were trying to head that off. What bothered us, again, in 2017, the legislature had gone home. The secretary mandates 2 vaccines. One wasn't even on anybody's radar, and we think with that situation, we want to head that off. Let you folks have a say in it. Let the doctor come here, testify, tell you everything he wants to tell you about the vaccine that he proposes, but let you guys weigh in on it. Right now, you don't have any say. He'll run a regulation, 2 months, give us a hearing, which doesn't really count. In another month, he'll have his vaccine. That's all I'm saying. We got 70. Let's think about it from here on out.
Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. This is probably for Connie. Sherry Graham did a really nice job of tracing the money trail through the CDC and the Kdhs to the Immunized Kansas Coalition. Your affiliate, you might step up, Connie.
My name is Connie Newcomb.
Thank you. You're with Kansas for Health Freedom. Can you tell us about the money you receive for the government or the money you pay me?
0. One word.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Senator Stephan. And in reading through the bill, could you just give us a quick point to the section of the bill that's most specific to what you're wanting to accomplish?
Yes. As you go through the bill, there's really 2 sections to this bill. The first section addresses daycare, and there's several pages of long-standing rules and rules in regards to daycare. And then Jenna added in the list of all the required immunizations at present. And then we put in there that the Secretary of Health and Environment could delete from that list, but could not add from it. That's all that went on in the daycare section. The other section is in regards to school-age children. And it does literally the exact same thing. It goes in and lists these same required immunizations. It doesn't change or delete any of those. And then it too says that the Secretary of Health and Environment can delete from that list but cannot add further to it. And by default, that moves the decision-making back to the parents and back to the legislature.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we are needing to get moving so we can get through all of the testimony. And just my 2 cents as a comment of something that I heard, it's just a comment. My personal opinion is something I have learned being up here in the legislature is everything is political. And moving on, one is you elect people, the other are unelected. So with that, we will now move to our neutral testimony. Kevin Alt, MD and a professor with the KU Med Center, and he is online. Kevin, welcome to the committee.
Thank you for having me. I submitted some written testimony as well. My name is Kevin Alt, as you heard, and I'm a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Kansas. I'm also a voting member of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. There are 15 members of this committee. There's expertise in pediatrics, infectious disease, family medicine, public health, nursing, and we also have 1 public member. There are 30 medical organizations that we have as liaisons, and for a long time I was the liaison member from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists before I became a voting member. We're selected by the Secretary of Health, by Health and Human Services, and certain people are not allowed to be members of the ACIP because they have ties to pharmaceutical companies such as a family member or themselves working for the family or working for a pharmaceutical company. Our meetings are public. We usually have 6 days of meetings a year in 3 different blocks, but this year we've had 11 meetings over the last 6 months to deal with the current pandemic crisis. You can hear our meetings on YouTube channels. You can participate in the meetings through public written comment or oral statements as well. I think the main thing I wanted to emphasize today is that our recommendations are data-driven. You can hear us debate for many hours the safety and efficacy of vaccines, and the recent COVID vaccines are a very good example of that. These trials have been published in medical journals such as the New England Journal of Medicine and are available to review. We take into account the vaccine characteristics, the disease burden, the people who are at risk, the cost of the vaccine, as well as stakeholder input to make our decisions. These decisions, as I said previously, are approved by the director of the CDC. I'm also one of the chairs of the Immunization Schedule Committee, and in that role, we make our recommendations to the CDC director. Those recommendations are eventually endorsed by medical organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Family Practice. Many of you have probably seen that schedule in its different colors as you go to your doctor's appointments. So I'll be glad to answer any questions about the ACIP.
Kevin, thank you for your testimony. Committee, do we have any questions for the neutral conferee? Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Alt, you're clearly with KU Medical Center, an academic institution. Is academia free of politics?
We don't have elected officials telling us what to do, so I was listening in and trying to figure out what the definition of politics was when you were debating it. So, but no, we're not elected. We're peer reviewed.
Is academia free of opinion?
No, but as I said, opinions are data driven in the ACIP and hopefully in my whole department among my trainees.
More quick follow-up. Did science have any political influence through the pandemic response? Thank you.
I'm here to talk about ACIP, and I can certainly tell you what we did, and it's not a mystery because, as I said, it's part of the public record. So we responded within the framework of laws that were set up after 9/11 and after the prior pandemic as far as the emergency use authorization. That was actually done by the FDA, not by the ACIP, and we responded in such. And the reason we had emergency meetings was so we could respond in a quick and orderly fashion.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doctor, I've read a lot about these vaccines. Would you agree that this one is experimental?
As I alluded to in the previous question, this vaccine was approved by the FDA as what's called an emergency use authorization. That came up after the 9/11 attacks to protect Americans against biological threats, emerging infectious diseases, and that type of thing. So no, I would not agree that they're experimental. They've been approved by the FDA and recommended by the ACIP under a legal framework that's been around for 10 or 15 years.
I've also read, if I may, sorry, read about something called antibody-dependent enhancement. Can you speak to that and how that may impact someone's long-term perspective if they receive this vaccine?
We had talked about that at ACIP with the dengue vaccine, which is not going to be given in Kansas because we don't have dengue in Kansas. But basically, if you get vaccinated with certain dengue vaccines after you've had dengue, you get a worse disease. We've not seen that with the vaccine for COVID. And of course, we've given 110 million or so doses of the 3 vaccines that are under emergency use right now. So it doesn't seem to be a concern. You can see it in animal models, but our human experience doesn't support that that's happening with this vaccine.
Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony, and we will move on to opponent testimony. Committee, next up we have Dr. Lee Norman, Secretary of Kdhs. Dr. Norman, welcome to the committee, and I apologize for short time, but we are running to the minute, so if you could keep everything under 2 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated, because if we go 2 minutes for each conferee, we will not have questions for any of the opponents. I know some of you guys would probably prefer that, but we would still as a committee like to ask those. So Dr. Norman, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Hildebrand and members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to provide opponent testimony to Senate Bill 212. 212 amends KSA 65-508 and the Child Care Act KSA 72-6262, which to specify required vaccines for children in licensed child care facilities and in schools. And currently, the vaccine requirements are found in KAR 28-1-20. The regulation was first adopted in 1978 and has only been amended 3 times over the last 40 years. So it's been a very durable and lasting regulation. The Kdhs secretary is advised by the content experts in the Kansas Immunization Program, and you've heard also from the CDC, ACIP, Academy of Pediatrics, Family Medicine, et cetera. The ACIP is globally regarded as a premier resource for making those recommendations, and we tend to adopt them as you have discussed. The ACIP uses many subject matter experts and a lot of epidemiology and clinical research. I think it's important, and we think it's important, that the vaccines remain in regulation in KAR 28-1-20 rather than listed in statutes in order to support timely response to changes in ACIP recommendations. A new vaccine may be recommended by the ACIP, or it may be one because of new findings were recommended to be removed. And in either case, we want to act quickly. And that's what this will allow us to do by keeping it in regulation. It is important to note also that vaccines decision-making have to be decided annually by February, and then in order to get them in place in August. If they were listed in statutes, the ability to do so would be hampered. So in summary, history shows us that vaccine requirements do not change frequently, as the current regulation has only been amended 3 times in 40 years. This demonstrates KDHE's commitment to evidence-based public health decisions and conservative use of this regulation as it applies to immunization. And thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony.
Norman, thank you for your testimony. Committee, our next opponent testimony is Shelby Ostrom, Strategic Initiatives Director for Nurture KC, and she is here in person. Shelby, welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much. I won't take up too much of your time, but I wanted to come in opposition of Senate Bill 212. My name is Shelby Ostrom, like you said, and I am the Strategic Initiatives Director over at Nurture KC. We also have a program that I oversee called the Mid-America Immunization Coalition, and that is why I'm here today. So the Mid-America Immunization Coalition provides support and education for the importance of vaccines in Kansas, particularly in Wyandotte and Johnson County. I did also want to include, I mentioned in my submitted testimony, we had an opportunity to interview my great aunt Joyce Berry, who had polio when she was 9 years old. Of course, this was right before the polio vaccine had become available, but she ended up losing the ability to move her legs for about 92 days. And she was not allowed to come back to public school, and her mom had to petition the Kansas City, Missouri School District to have her come back. She ended up being paralyzed for a very long time after that 92 days. In 2015, she was diagnosed with post-polio syndrome, which is the reissue of the issues that you have with your legs. And so she ended up falling off a bus in 2015, right after she was diagnosed, and could no longer walk. She uses a walker. So with all of that being said, we did want to definitely remind everybody that the Kdhs is very important in producing these vaccines and making sure that they are on the schedule. So thank you.
Shelby, thank you for your testimony. Committee, next we have Sarah Ursick-Good. She is the president and CEO of Kfmc, and she is here in person. Sarah, welcome to the committee.
Good morning. My name is Sarah, and I'm the CEO of Kfmc, a not-for-profit organization focused on improving healthcare quality. Kfmc is also an institutional member of the Immunization Coalition, and I serve on their board of directors. Kfmc is a Medicare-certified quality improvement organization as defined by the Social Security Act and an independent review organization accredited by URAC. Both of those designations require that we be completely unaffiliated with any healthcare organization or provider type, and we must be able to continuously perform work with objectivity, impartiality, and in a fair and neutral manner. So my testimony that I provide to you today, both written and in person, is done without undue influence or conflict. Like Kfmc, IKC is also an independent and objective source of information, contrary to the misinformation that you've been receiving via emails and today. Please read my detailed evidence-based responses to many of the things that you've heard today. Specifically, subpoint 12 and subpoint 13 address IKC and our HPV goals. Spoiler alert, those HPV goals are not because we were paid by pharmaceutical companies. But understanding what is true and what is not is sometimes difficult with the sheer volume of information that you're receiving. It is overwhelming, and it's only gotten worse in light of the recent release of the COVID vaccine. It is important as lawmakers for you to understand that misinformation related to vaccines is widespread, and it is that misinformation that is resulting in a lack of public confidence and not a lack of evidence supporting their use. Groups who oppose vaccination, mandatory or otherwise, are very active in creating messaging and telling stories to support their positions, but what is the truth? The truth is that only 1% to 3% of the population is unvaccinated, which is a proxy measure for those who oppose vaccine mandates. Those opinions, the ones you've heard today, the ones flooding your inboxes, those represent only 3% of the population that you serve. And they seek to disrupt the status quo despite the overwhelming amount of evidence that the status quo is effective. And with that, I would stand for any questions later related to Kfmc or IKC.
Sarah, thank you for your testimony. Committee, next we have Sharon Morris. She's KSNO Board of Directors, and she is with us virtually. Sharon, welcome to the committee. And just a reminder, you guys are doing a really good job of keeping it under 2 minutes, and I appreciate it. So if everybody else can do the same, thank you. Sharon, are you with us?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to come here and testify in opposition to this bill. I am Sharon Morris, a Kansas school nurse for 17 years, Director of Health Services for a Kansas school district, and board member of Kansas School Nurses Organization, mother of 2 children who are vaccinated, and I've also submitted my written testimony. Luckily, so many of the diseases that we consider to be common childhood illnesses are not so common anymore because they did come with significant complications and mortality that we've forgotten over the years due to the success of immunizations. Earlier proponent testimony stated that the best way to keep our children healthy is to keep acutely ill students out of our schools, and I totally agree with that. Immunization is effective in doing this. Most of these illnesses are contagious prior to their first symptoms, and that puts our other school children at risk if they are not immunized. state immunization requirements for school-aged children exist to protect children against vaccine-preventable diseases. These requirements are important in keeping students in school, and the herd immunity of the majority of students helps protect the most vulnerable of our community. Those individuals with complex medical conditions or allergies to the immunizations, and it wraps them in that community of vaccinated peers that gives them access to educational opportunities by enabling them to attend school and gives them equal access. Current state statute states that the standard is that all school children should be immunized with the most recent appropriate dose. And this bill would not change that. It would not change that mandate and make it not a mandate unless that is a future plan. So this simply moves the governance of the specific list of required immunizations from the Department of Health and Environment to a legislative process that would impose political processes and timing on a public health issue. The timing is significant for school nurses who have to get the notifications out for the next year by a deadline of May 15th, as well as the flexibility to adapt to current practice and changes that are recommended by ACIP. So we need to be able to respond in a timely manner. Medical research and best practice changes rapidly, and it does not lend itself well to the legislative process. As an experienced school nurse, I strongly oppose this bill and support the current practice that provides legislative oversight and provides exemptions for medical and religious reasons only. Thank you for your time.
Aaron, thank you for your testimony. Next up, committee, we have Dr. Dina Hubbard, coordinator for the Kansas chapter of AA of Pediatrics. Dr. Hubbard, welcome to the committee. And again, we are on a time crunch. I apologize. If you could keep your testimony under 2 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee, the opportunity to be here. My name is Dr. Dina Hubbard. I'm a pediatrician and the public policy chair for the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Thank you for having me. I want to say that I am not paid. I am not afraid. I believe in the evidence. I do not receive any money for vaccines, nor have I ever heard of that from any of my colleagues. I have 4 quick points. 1, vaccines are safe and effective. Childhood vaccines have been extremely successful in reducing disease, and for most, we are at a record low, but not all diseases, and that has come with vaccine hesitancy and misinformation. Number 2, this legislation is unnecessary. There is no real problem, no need, no demand or desire to change the law. Keeping things as is and voting no on this means that experts, medical experts, can keep the ability and manage health issues. Objectors may still object, keep that ability. And we do not, in the process, add more complexity. Number 3, decision-making should be between the physician and families. Even many families that are vaccine hesitant, after they are able to talk with their pediatrician who they trust or their family physician, they agree to immunization. So 9 out of 10 families follow vaccine guidelines and recommendations. Without immunizations, students, their families, communities are at risk for serious, potentially fatal disease. My children are vaccinated. I treat children, my patients, like I would want to be treated, and I want my children to be treated. So my children have received all their eligible vaccines. I cried the day I got my COVID vaccine. I've been on the front line. My oldest had rotavirus and pneumococcal disease before there was a vaccine available and ended up in the hospital. I've signed my youngest daughter up for the vaccine trial because I believe in the evidence. I want to protect my children from avoidable, preventable harm. So in conclusion, this bill risks Kansas' ability to respond to the best evidence-based medicine and recommendations as determined by ACIP. Listing vaccines in statute would add a layer of bureaucracy and complexity to vaccinations. Vaccinations are a nonpartisan, proven public health strategy. Please vote no on Senate Bill 212 so we can continue to protect Kansas children from preventable harm to the best of our ability. I would like to recognize that we are all experiencing
Doctor,
a
I
collective trauma
apologize, but you're way
COVID.
past 2 minutes and we are out of
Thank you.
time for our meeting. We still had 4 conferees. I apologize. There's no way we can get to you. We're 4 minutes past our time. I did want to at least allow the committee a couple of questions. Dr. Roy Jensen, Dan Leong, Kelly Summers, and Dr. Chad Johanning, I apologize. We ran out of time and did not get to you. We do have your written testimony, and if you guys can hold on, you might be able to answer some questions if they are asked. But we're going to take 2 questions, and then we are going to adjourn because we are out of time. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is for anyone, any one of the opponent testimony. I've read a number of surveys that indicate a number of frontline workers, including doctors, are refusing to take this vaccine because of their own personal concerns about the safety of the vaccine. How could we possibly force parents to give children this vaccine when frontline workers are refusing to do so?
Can I answer that question since I'm an RN? My name is Kelly Summers, and I'm with the Kansas State Nurses Association. So we represent over the 40,000 RNs in our state. It's a very good question, an appropriate question that you're asking. At the beginning, when the vaccine first came out, I know there was a lot of hesitancy with RNs regarding this vaccination. We haven't had time to educate ourselves regarding this vaccine because we've been so busy saving the lives of others. As you see, as the vaccine has rolled out more, we're seeing more and more RNs who have been willing to receive this vaccine. We in no way want to say right now when, even though we've gone through phase 3, we want to continue to educate, advocate on behalf of the public before we would ever make something mandated for a child and continue to research and follow evidence-based practice. Does that help?
That does. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Senator Erickson, if you can keep your question and answer to under 1 minute, you can ask it.
I'm trying. I'll go real quick. I see we have a lot of school nurses testifying as opponents. My question would be, we've heard testimony that school immunization requirements have to be submitted by February, so they're in place for August. My question to any of the school nurses or opponents is this: other than for religious and medical exemptions, do we have students in our classrooms after August who are not fully immunized? Thank you. I'll keep it short, Mr. Chair. Yes, in fact, we do. As a former principal, I know we do. We give them till October, November to get those immunizations done before we say you cannot come to school anymore. My question is then, why are they allowed to come not fully immunized for 2 to 3 months after the requirement has been set?
I apologize. I do remember there was a school nurse. If you want to answer, I'd forgotten the name. So if you want to respond real quick.
This is Sharon Morris. I have been a school nurse for a number of years. We do try to work very diligently with parents, recognizing that sometimes they are unfamiliar with what the requirements are, or they have, just failed to get that. We do not want to decrease their time in classrooms as much as possible, and so we work with them and do give a bit of flexibility. We in our district have 3 different deadlines in order to minimize that, so that as people enroll throughout the school year, if they have a shortage or are not compliant in all of the requirements, that there is an early deadline coming up that gives them a little bit of time to go out and find a pediatrician and get the vaccination and still be compliant.
Sharon, thank you for the answer. Committee and conferees, I apologize. We did run out of time. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.